It's Croctober, the official celebration of Crocs fans like you. So whether you like to rock your classic clogs, get cozy and fuss-lined, personalize with your favorite Jibbitz charms, or even, dress up like a clog for Halloween, it's time to tell your story and share your style. Join the Croctober celebration with Crocs fans around the world. Go to crocs.com to discover the range of shoes and find a pair that's iconic like you. Crocs, celebrating you all month long.
This episode is brought to you by Financial Times. When it comes to voicing or acting on our opinions, why are some people more confident than others? With the Financial Times, you form your own opinions with conviction based on unbiased and trusted reporting. FT journalists tackle global issues with an impartial and rigorous mindset, providing the facts and analysis that you need to make up your own mind. Make up your own mind with Financial Times. Visit ft.com/the journal to read free articles and subscribe.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. My guest today is Mark Green, founder of the Democracy Project, twice elected public advocate for New York City, and the author of a bunch of books, the latest of which is The Inflection Election, Democracy or Fascism in 2024, which we'll be discussing today. Mark Green, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, Michael. Thank you.
So I always like to start with titles because I think they're there for a reason. And so The Inflection Election. And I guess when I read that title, I thought, it seems like every election is being billed these days as the most important election ever. So I thought that's a good place for us to jump off. Why do you see 2024 as such a critical juncture for American democracy?
Well, inflection election, because unlike Carter IV, 1976, we're both center-left, center-right, hard to distinguish. The gap between Trump and Harris is unprecedented. It's been historically true that to call someone a fascist, which I never did in the 1960s when I came of age politically, sounded naive and hysterical. So we avoid it. Unless you have a nominee like Trump who's announcing it. And denialism is a human reaction. If any of us are driving our car, we hit some ice and we're skidding toward a cliff. Everybody says to themselves in their heads, I can't believe this is happening. A lot of Americans are also saying now, I can't believe that this is happening, but it is. And listen to his own words and deeds.
I certainly share some of those concerns, but then I think about some folks on the right, like my co-host on the show, Jay, would argue that Trump certainly has some, I'll put it in the nicest way possible, disturbing tendencies. But Jay's argument, which I think is echoed by a lot of folks on what I'd call the establishment right, is that we saw that there were these institutional checks and balances that worked to prevent Trump from becoming some sort of authoritarian in his first term. And their argument seems to be that, these same checks and balances will work again if Donald Trump is reelected a few weeks from now. What do you think about that?
Jay is earnest and naive. So if I said that I was naive, or others decades ago to label everybody a fascist, it's now naive to deny it. And if you look at all the metrics involved, what is a fascist? It's not only Hitler. Trump is not Hitler. But let's go through the checklist. From Mussolini to Putin, they encourage or acquiesce to violence. Check. Look at January 6th. They're corrupt criminals. Well, until Trump, no president had ever been indicted. Trump's now been convicted 34 times with 3 other cases. The destructive fascists pick on minorities, of course, most prominently Jews in Italy and Germany previously. And now Trump treats Latino immigrants and black people as the other. And when he says that immigrants are going to come into your kitchen and slit your throat, that's not normal. And Trump lies like you and I breathe. Every politician may be hyperbolic, but the Washington Post had 34,000 instances in his first term where he lied or engaged in a falsehood, which was 22 a day. You know, Michael, I bet you and I in our lifetimes haven't lied 34 times, 34,000 times, or 22 times a day. So we're dealing. And finally, if Jay says, it didn't happen before. Castro attempted to overthrow the Batista government. Hitler failed, of course, in his 1923 beer hall putsch. Don't give these people a second chance. And the only reason we now know, looking back, that Trump didn't do this before is one person, Mike Pence, a very right-wing guy who, as everybody knows, wouldn't lie and wouldn't reject certification of a lawful and fair election. And so we need more assurance than to come down to one Horatio at the bridge.
Yeah, I certainly do not like hardly any of Donald Trump's policies. But there's, I guess, a difference between a lot of things that I'm certain he would do if reelected, I would absolutely hate. But then there's this term that comes up a lot, existential threat to democracy. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around that, because I certainly believe that the United States would be in a far worse place if Donald Trump is elected compared to Kamala Harris. But this idea that there's a chance that democracy itself will somehow cease to exist, I don't know. To me, that feels over the top. I wanted to get your take on that.
It's over the top because in America, we've never seen it before. And so a lot of people go, he won't do that. Oh, really? Look, he already tried to overturn an election and the government, of course, on January 6th. And the people he has around him, like a former General Michael Flynn, says, he could see executing critics in the future. Again, will he? Are we comfortable that he won't do what he says? I need more assurance than that. The problem is people say, he's not going to do it. Trump's biggest flaw is not that he lies. He does. Even his friends have to say it. He doesn't even believe in truth. Like Joseph Goebbels, he told Billy Bush of Hollywood Access fame, Billy Bush asked him, why do you lie all the time? He said, look, if you repeat something often enough, people believe you. They just do. And that he's an idiot savant because he's proven that if he repeats something enough, like, for example, all his efforts about restricting voting are based on the totally false premise that election fraud is prevalent. His attorney general didn't think so. 60 courts didn't think so. An internal investigation by the Trump campaign after 2016 said there was no fraud that would have changed any state. And by the way, we have 10,000 voting jurisdictions. The chance that there would be coordination within and between them based on fraud has never been true. And it's frankly almost physically impossible. But that's the premise of his whole campaign, which is us versus them. And an us versus them campaign, I remember in 1968, when George Herbert Walker Bush once, he's a very gentlemanly man, a partisan, but gentlemanly, quite experienced. He called Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee, a clown. Well, people were up in arms, like, how could he do that? It's so undignified. And now we're talking a day after Donald Trump referred to, Arnold Palmer schlong, which alone is stupid. But 34,000 times later, we're dealing with Donald the Menace. And for people not to take him at his word and look at what he tried to do, his beer hall poosh in January of 2001, they're the ones who are being blind. Allow me one detour. History is inches. And after the fact, we realize, the intended assassin, Archduke, in 1914 in Sarajevo, he shot at him and his wife, missed, was upset, went to a bar to commiserate with his co-conspirators. And then the Archduke, coincidentally, drove by the bar. He sees this, jumps out, shoots, kills him, and we have World War I, 20 million people dead. In 1933, after FDR had been elected the first time overwhelmingly, a woman and her hearse jostled an intended assassin in Miami Beach. And as a result, the mayor of Chicago was shot and killed, not the intended target, FDR. What's different, and of course, can you imagine America without a New Deal, without FDR during World War II? Conclusion, what's different is now we're not looking back at what was a near miss, which is what happened with Trump's efforts before. But we now know it's happening now. And your question presumes a problem. So much of the mainstream media can't believe something is happening that they've never previously encountered. So they engage in this both sidesism that, Trump wants to jail his opponents and Harris said something silly and make them an equivalent. They're not reporting the truth. They're valuing false balance over facts.
I would hazard to guess that I probably have more faith in the Supreme Court than you might, because I look at the court and I think, well, push comes to shove. You have the court's three liberals who I have a fair amount of faith in. And I also think that John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, even though I disagree with her on a lot, seem to be pretty respectable people. And sure, you have Thomas and Alito who are kind of off the reservation at times, but I feel like if Trump really tries to push the Constitution past any reasonable bounds, that the Supreme Court would be a backstop. I'm guessing you don't have that sort of confidence that I do.
Well, I grew up believing in institutions. My parents were Republicans. And I went to law school and I had to presume that courts were honest arbiters of the facts and law until now. And so we have 6 Republicans who were there by a fluke. Sandra Day O'Connor quit because to take care of her husband who had Alzheimer's. And suddenly we have a Clarence Thomas young radical instead. Mitch McConnell stole a seat where he initially wouldn't even allow Merrick Garland to have a hearing to become a justice. And the conservatives on the court say, they're just umpires, their words, calling balls and strikes. Really, Justice Roberts in his court overturned the key elements of the Voting Rights Act after the act had been passed 99-0 when it was reauthorized under George Bush. Not good enough for him, so he said, no, it goes too far. They argued in the Dobbs case that there's no right of privacy in the Constitution. Where is the word privacy or abortion in the Constitution? Well, that's true. But where is the word immunity, presidential immunity in the Constitution? But they now have created out of whole cloth this concept that just as we have a nominee, former president, who wants to try again to overturn laws, they're giving him a green light to precisely do so. And so the Dobbs, it's not moderate to overturn 52 years of women assuming they had a right to decide when and whether to have a family. And then to overturn that has led to let me say it clearly, thousands of women throughout the country who have been raped or violated by incest, getting pregnant, and now 40% of American women are in states that either ban or de facto ban abortion. So those things are not mainstream. And as a result, it's not just me, it's not just my book, Inflection Election. 70% of Americans 2 years ago only had respect for the Supreme Court. It's down to 40%. I wish I could claim credit for that, but I'm not going to apologize for prescience. The credit goes to Justice Roberts, who talks like an institutionalist, but votes like Donald Trump.
Yeah, when we take a look at Donald Trump, some people would say, well, Donald Trump is a symptom. And if you take a look at right-wing populism, it's not just a U.S. thing, right? We see countries, democracies all over the place where right-wing populism is on the rise. And so I'm wondering what you think about Donald Trump as a symptom of something that's much bigger than him. He just happened to be the right or the wrong guy, however you look at it, at the right time. And how do you interpret this rise in right-wing populism, not just in the U.S., but in so many other democracies around the world?
Well, it's true that right-wing candidates in the past would have been tossed aside, but have won to be the head of state in Italy, for example, Argentina, for example. However, in the Conservative Party in Great Britain got destroyed in the most recent election, and Marine Le Pen got destroyed in the French election. But you're right. There are right-wing so-called populists. They're not populists, like for the people. They're authoritarians. And what do all these countries have in common? The world economy has diminished over decades for a variety of reasons. So people are more economically tense. Also, immigration has increased, climate immigration, for example, and people fleeing dictatorships in South America, to the southern border. And so dangerous authoritarians in our country and other countries say things like Hitler. Hitler called Jews and others vermin who poisoned our blood. That's a quote. Those are the exact words Trump uses now to describe lawful or undocumented immigrants. He dehumanizes them. It makes it easier for people to vote for the far right or engage in violence to fend it off. And so we can analyze the reasons, and whether it's chicken and egg and chicken, what comes first, because is Trump the symptom or the cause? I'm afraid it's both. The Republican Party, let's be honest here, has a tradition of skillful demagogues from McCarthy to Nixon to Father Coughlin to Richard Nixon to Ronald Reagan to Newt Gingrich and now Trump. And the Democrats don't have that. And often those megaphones fail, but there's if more than half the Republican Party believe that Barack Obama, the first black president, was born abroad and hence not legally a president. More than half of Republicans say that racism, in their words, against white people, like you and me, is worse than against black people. That I even have to talk about this is absurd. People who join, Republicans are not all racists, obviously, but all racists are just about Republicans only. And so we got to blow the whistle on this and to look away from it because it sounds impolite. Now let's deal with the facts on the ground. If you deny a fact, wrote Aldous Huxley, it doesn't make it untrue.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. With Cybersecurity Awareness Month winding down, LifeLock wants to remind you to update your software. These updates will patch up security issues that identity thieves can exploit to gain access to your personal info. For comprehensive identity theft protection, there's LifeLock. LifeLock alerts you to more uses of your personal info and fixes issues that arise. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast.
The reality is, guys prefer naturals. And if it's natural body wash you're looking for, Dr. Squatch has got you Natural Kings covered. The ingredients, naturals. Scent options, naturals. Around-the-clock moisturization, naturally. Now available in-store and online at drsquatch.com. Dr. Squatch Body Wash, for men who prefer natural.
I guess I wonder, because there's a lot there that I certainly agree with, but then I think, well, if we have to somehow come to terms with the popularity of MAGA and Donald Trump, right? Because however much we may decry it, and I think we should, it is awfully popular. And so maybe one way to deal with that is to say, well, Donald Trump is just this sort of master salesman. You called him an idiot savant, and I think there's maybe something to that. But I think partly maybe we on the left need to look in the mirror and say, how did we manage to allow something like this? And are we maybe out of touch with real Americans? And how have we failed so many regular Americans that they would turn to someone like Donald Trump? What do you think about that?
That self-immolation is way off base. In the last 8 presidential elections, Democrats won the popular vote, a majority or a plurality, 7 of 8 times. Democrats are by far have more popular views on federal spending, social programs, the climate, gun control. And so, there's a cliche, you don't bring a pillow to a knife fight. You don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Well, if Republicans are consistently lying. Yesterday, I saw Speaker Mike Johnson say on air, everyone knows that the economy under Trump was the best ever and it's awful now. Without getting into detail, it's the exact opposite. So he's allowed to say that, but we can't just be mild and engage in Robert's Rules of Orders when it comes to debate. Instead of, and I very much admire how Vice President Harris and Walz are running their campaign. She is, over her career, scandal-free, nearly error-free, but they often flinch at punching back because they're logical, they're lawyerly, they're evidence-based. Well, I think we got to expose Trump for what he is, because if enough children, remember when a lot of adults stopped smoking because their children said, hey, Dad, what are you doing? You're going to kill yourself. I don't want to, be an orphan. Well, we have to explain exactly why they are destructive fascists. As it is, Trump calls Harris fascist, a communist, and a socialist. Oh, which is a lie, obviously. Her colleagues in the Senate know that she's quite moderate. But we're not allowed to tell the truth using those words. So I'm not going to handcuff ourselves. And I hope the book encourages more young people to say to their parents, you're for this slandering, vile-mouthed, corrupt, destructive fascist. Look at everything he says and does. And I hope that I can't, you can't, but I hope that families within themselves can shame relatives away from voting for a guy who says he wants to be a dictator on day one and who says he loves dictators. I've heard Trump, we all have. He loves Kim and Putin and Marie Le Pen. He never says that he loves Democratic heads of state like Macron, Trudeau. He wants to be one, and he admitted it. So let's take him at his word.
When a lot of not Donald Trump is not the only person who's talking about election issues, though certainly he's kind of led that charge. He can't let go of 2020, obviously. But when I talk with my conservative co-host Jay and also May about this election integrity issue, if you will, what they'll often say is, listen, conservatives have a good reason to be skeptical because of how many changes were made so quickly in 2020 in response to the pandemic. And now the pandemic's over, it's not unreasonable to put back in place what they feel are reasonable safeguards that we had prior to 2020. And I wanted to get your reaction to that view.
May Jay be realistic. What's the evidence? Bill Barr says there wasn't evidence of voter fraud. There is evidence of candidates, Republicans, who have been indicted because they were engaged in fraudulent activity. Not because, I mean, think about it. Why would a voter, there were 152 million people who voted for president in 2020. Why would one voter risk jail and reputation destruction by engaging in some kind of fraud, which is why it happens 0.00001% of the time, less frequently than you or I might get hit by lightning. So all these people are just making this up. There are these great big lies that I'm afraid your colleagues, led by Trump, are saying. They said that Hillary was going to be indicted and was a crook. Didn't happen. They said Obama was a foreigner. They said the 2020 election was stolen. No one has showed it. No one. And now they say that immigrant crime is rampant. Nope. Actually, crime by legal and undocumented people per capita is less than the white domestic population. So on every basis, they are shouting on a pack of lies. And if we reward them with re-election because state officials have openly said they may not certify a fair vote, that is an inflection election. That means that we don't have free and fair elections. They don't want free and fair elections because they lose, as I indicated, when it's based on votes. But with an electoral college enacted in 1789, because Southern states said, we're not going to unite in a confederation called the United States unless you give us disproportionate power. So rural vote then and now, the Confederate States then and in 1860 and now are the same states. Well, it's time to say basta.
Yeah, even if, and I agree with you, that the idea that there's any kind of widespread election fraud just is not, it's not evidence-based at all. But even if that's the case, and it is, we can agree on that, but the public clearly, a large portion of the public clearly has decreased faith in the integrity of our elections. And that's a problem that we somehow have to do something about. And so it seems to me like people on the right, they see every attempt to make voting less onerous as a threat to fair elections. But there are also a lot of people on the left who see every election integrity measure as voter suppression. And I'm wondering, is there any way to kind of compromise in that? Do you see there being any sort of compromise on that?
Well, yeah, it's called the 1965 Voting Rights Act, reenacted twice, as I indicated, by a unanimous Senate, which included Strom Thurmond. So the so-called compromise on voting, on abortion, was law for half a century. The Voting Rights Act, Roe v. Wade. The extremists are those people who have successfully overturned this via the Electoral College, via Clarence Thomas Court. And so the only way to change that, because a lot of Americans have been misled, is to defeat it at the polls. And it's funny we're talking about voter integrity. Donald Trump is not allowed to vote. He's a convicted felon. And so they call it voter integrity. I can call a banana an apple. It doesn't make it an apple. It's not voter integrity. That's a ruse to deny the vote to young voters who are more mobile and harder to register, older black voters who have trouble registering and voting. And it's a gimmick to reduce the Democrats' base. You know, Florida, governor in Florida won by under 1% of the vote. During his term, DeSantis disenrolled 800,000 Democrats. Oh, this one changed their voting registration. This one is a funny name. And so when you shrink the opposition, you're winning not because of voting, but miscounting intentionally. So do a lot of Americans buy this? I'm sorry. The only way is to wait for them to go away, be persuaded. Liz and Dick Cheney, 700 national security officials, many of whom are Republican, 200 former aides of Reagan, Bush 41 and Bush 43, have come out for Harris. So people are changing their mind when they hear what Trump says, when they see that this is fact versus fiction. And if enough people come to their senses by watching political guys and listening to you, not Jay, if there's a victory that is more a result of a blue backlash, because people say, wait a second, we've been tricked. And now that I have to actually vote, this is not just a poll. If Harris wins by the margin that Biden did, which is 4.5 percentage points nationally, or with 306 to 218 or so electoral votes, that could break the fever that a lot of these Republicans have. And when they see their children and their neighbors rejecting the dangerous extremism of Trump et al., it's the only way to come back and save the democracy that's lasted 248 years, not because but despite radicals like this.
Yeah, you know, I agree with a lot of the things you talk about as being, it feels to me, extreme and radical. But then I look at the polls and I see, like, in the next election in a few weeks, nearly half the country is going to vote for Donald Trump. I hope a few more people end up voting for Kamala Harris, especially in certain states. But I wonder if that's even the right term, if maybe the country has changed in some fundamental ways that we on the left have had trouble coming to terms with, and we need to do a better job. Because, I mean, if Donald Trump were to be taken down by evidence, we would think that all of these indictments and convictions and the things that he says and the crazy stuff that goes on at his rallies, but boy, that sure does seem to be where about half of the country is. And so I don't know what to do with that.
Well, earlier I said history is inches. The difference is when assassins failed in 1914 and 1933, we knew it after the fact. Now we're in the fact. And so if we don't blow the whistle now, if Harris Walls win, even by Biden standards from the year 2020, that's maybe as well as we're going to do. So why are some people believe that racism is worse against whites than blacks? It's hard to know. A lot of them are racially tense, they're economically threatened. The pandemic disrupted a lot of people emotionally, physically, politically. There's something wrong with our education system. They don't teach civics anymore. And finally, the mainstream media, many of them have really let us down. You know, every politician says, oh, the media has been unfair to me. Okay. Even beyond that, some of the biggest names, the New York Times until recently, Politico, Axios, sometimes the Washington Post, owned by a billionaire now, they, as I indicated, focus on even-handedness, balance. not truth and facts. And so they spent, the New York Times, the greatest paper in the world, I've been reading it daily for 55 years, they had, 50 articles that Biden was too old. It turns out maybe they were right. But when they found a flaw in his candidacy, not his character, but his candidacy because of the inevitability of age, boy, they ripped him to shreds. How many articles until 3 days ago had the word fascist in it because it does describe Trump? None. And so the Times and others, mainstream media, have failed to alert Americans. And I'm sorry that I and Bob Reich and Lawrence Tribe and MSNBC and many, many others are the ones that are now sounding the alarm, breaking the glass. It's because major institutions, educational institutions, the Fourth Estate, utterly failed to before, and other countries went fascist after huge disruptive events and insults. World War I, inflamed Germans and Italians who felt stabbed in the back, and also led to, in part, the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik victory. Well, is the pandemic plus these other things happening leading not to a 60-40 country, but a 52-48 country? Well, not if I can help it. Just one person, and Inflection Election was my best effort.
You argued in the book that Republicans have sort of weaponized culture war issues. I certainly agree with that. But then I think about it from a conservative perspective, and that perspective is that essentially that the progressive left is responsible for starting the culture wars by pushing what they see as radical gender ideology, critical race theory into schools and workplaces with DEI and stuff like that. And that essentially that they're just way out ahead of, I like to see it at least ahead of, or just not where the American public is. And so therefore, if you want to attribute responsibility for the culture war, you have to look at people who are trying to change the culture in ways that the American people, by and large, don't want. What do you think about that sort of conservative analysis of these things?
You know, someone could see two people fleeing a bank and think they're robbers. If one is Willie Sutton, he is. If one is me, who withdrew money lawfully and I'm in a rush, I'm not. It turns on the truth. What is the evidence? And for conservatives to blow up issues like gender identity, very few Americans, but some want to transition from one gender to another. It's their right, let them. If somebody wants to say they should be called by this pronoun or that pronoun, do we believe in freedom or not? A critical race theory, it was made up. It was a legitimate theory created by a brilliant Black scholar, a friend of mine, late friend, Derek Bell, who said that we should look at American history not only through 1776, but 1619 and the effect that the slave trade had on America. Well, no one teaches it in grade school or in high school for that matter. Yet in the states of Florida and Texas and others, they say critical race theory is an issue on the left. It doesn't exist among the schools that teach children, which is their point of view. However, a party that wants to cut taxes on Elon Musk and increase taxes on the middle class, a party that wants to deny women their right to choose, the right to read a particular book, the right to vote, to compare those two things is a lack of modernism in education. And if they want to compare gender transitioning to a deepening inequality among American owners and workers, they're allowed to say it, but it's frankly ridiculous. And I hope people understand that Trump is for the elite like Elon Musk, and Harris is for average families. And when people see how they will be benefited by policies that enhance their child's schooling, enhance their lungs so there's less pollution, enhance their spending power. Right now, Republicans are so desperate and lying so often that they're telling the exact opposite. It's the opposite of the truth on the economy. In fact, the economy now, the Dow has never been, is at record highs. Inflation is lowering. Real income is rising. The GDP is rising. The Economist and Wall Street Journal, owned by very strong conservatives, call America the same phrase, the envy of the world. And so this great economy is now being described as horrible, terrible, the worst ever. Well, if people believe it's the worst ever, get ready. It's going to get worse if the Trump-Musk duet take over.
I certainly agree with you that gender ideology and those LGBTQ issues and transitioning is, while really important to those people who are undergoing it, in the grand scheme, much more of a fringe sort of thing that's been blown up. But something that's much less fringe is abortion rights. And certainly a lot of folks on the left are understandably upset about what happened with Dobbs and what they would see fear under a Trump administration. But there are also a lot of folks on the right who I think are honestly motivated by this idea that there's a moral obligation to protect life that they believe supersedes a woman's right to bodily autonomy. So what do we say, those of us on the left, say to those people who have what are good faith religious objections or views on this, do you think?
I agree with you. You know, if someone is nervous because a Latino is living in their community and they want police to go up to them and say, we may deport you, let me see your papers, that's a big problem. And that opposes freedom for other people. If people, for religious reasons, think that, my birthday is March 15th, hold your presents. Why March 15th? That's when I was born. Everybody does it when they were born. If some people, for religious reasons, wants to say life begins at conception, they can say so, but they're really imposing their religious values on people who believe in choice and their religious values that allow women to make that choice. So I respect people who, for religious reasons, oppose abortion. I politically don't respect them, but it's freedom. But they're imposing their definition of freedom on 2/3 of us. This country is 2/3 pro-choice, 1/3 life begins at birth. And if the latter comes true, we're going to have thousands of women dying and disrupting their lives because the Trump team has edged into power by lying about Democrats. So I can respect people who disagree with me on the merits. We can argue about the facts, but I can't respect people who are lion kings.
Hey, as while we're on religion, I've heard from some folks on, especially the progressive left, the concern about what's often called Christian nationalism. And I've always felt it was kind of a fringe sort of thing, in part because Americans aren't nearly as religious as we used to be. And Trump certainly is not a religious guy at all. And so I don't really have a whole lot of fears about some radical Christian nationalist agenda, but it seems like some folks who are to the left of me in the Democratic Party do have those fears. And I wanted to get your take on Christian nationalism in the Republican Party and in potentially a second Trump administration.
Well, it's okay to be Christian. It's okay to be a nationalist, proud of your country, whatever happens. But think of a person, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is a Christian nationalist. She has said she wants a government based on Christianity and the Bible, not on constitutional law. And so that's fringe. Now, that the media plays up the extremes, including her, and people like her, it has led to a political party in America now, the Grand Old Party, that's anchored in so-called Christian nationalism, kind of theologists, big business, the far-right ideologically Pat Buchanan types, and racially tense people. Those are the four cornerstones of the Republican Party. And it's gotten them to be the second great party in this country. It's gotten them to lose presidentially, except for the Electoral College, which has jinxed us now for 2.5 centuries. Two of the last four presidents lost the popular vote, but were chosen by Electoral College. It will soon be 3 out of 5. Everyone knows Trump's not going to win the popular vote. If he somehow becomes president again with the Electoral College. So we are teetering. And that's why election inflection, it's not like, I voted for Obama. If Romney had won, here's a guy who we now see is a conservative, wants to reduce federal spending, but is a person of religious faith, integrity, law. He previously was a governor and a senator. And so if Romney had won, I wouldn't have written an inflection election. I would be upset. But just like all of us, Republicans and Democrats, independents alike, I've lost more elections than I've won. And the next day, I don't attack. Michael Bloomberg beat me for mayor by 2 points. I don't say it's rigged. I go, congratulations, Mike. And I move ahead. They're not doing that. They're the radicals who are denying the lawful transition of power. And like hell, I'm not going to say it, because some people say, oh, there are parties on the left and on the right. Forget that. Both sides is crap. You can't find the equivalent of a Marjorie Taylor Greene and a Donald Trump and an Elon Musk, who is not just a media baron. He owns Twitter or X, and he is infecting millions of minds with what is a huge spurt in anti-Semitic racist tweets from neo-Nazi sites, provably. He says, well, that's just speech. Well, he's hiding behind that because it's hate speech, and he has to take responsibility for that.
In the book, you have this concept they call stochastic terrorism, and you talk about that in relation to Donald Trump. I was hoping you could explain to folks what you mean by that and whether it's just a right-wing thing or if you see any of it on the left as well.
Oh, it's not on the left. That is, look at our politics and society through the lens of violence. Trump said the way to beat crime is to have one night where cops can do whatever they want, kind of like the movie Purge. He talks about people who didn't like Hillary Clinton may use their Second Amendment rights. Oh, what did he mean by that? No Democrat has done the equivalent. And so when Trump rails against immigrants and black people, and you should go back to the country where you came from, etc., he is encouraging what it's not that I call stochastic terrorism. It's a Greek word which means when a speaker doesn't want a particular person dead, but he tells a crowd that person, and this is quoting Trump, is a scumbag, is a shit. He called Kamala Harris a shit the other day. When he dehumanizes people as vermin, people who were mass murderers then, who killed 9 Jewish Americans at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, a white man who shot up the supermarket in Buffalo, another white person who killed 30-plus Latinos in El Paso. They are quoting Trump and his views about the border. So Trump may not have known what person would be set off, but he knows, and look at the court system. If a conservative judge rules against a Democratic plaintiff, they don't get hate mail. If a liberal judge like Judge Chutkin, for example, or Jack Smith, the federal prosecutor, indicts a Republican and convicts them, they know they're getting hate mail. Mitt Romney said that when he voted twice for impeachment of Trump, he had fellow Republican senators say, Mitch, I can't do that with you because I'm afraid for the safety of myself and my family. Think about that. You can't have a democracy when one party lies all the time and one party hints at violence all the time. And no Democrat. Now, the Republican answer, listen carefully. Oh, a supporter of Bernie Sanders shot a Congressman Steve Scalise at a congressional baseball game. That's true. Of course, you have nuts in every party, but Senator Sanders didn't advocate that. He didn't talk against gun control. He's shown no racial or political hate. Republicans are encouraging that. Democrats are not. And finally, the current FBI director, appointed by Trump, has said that domestic terrorism is the greatest inspiration of political murder. 75% of politically related killings are because of the far right. And the rest are some jihadists, etc. So there's no parity. And people want to pretend that the Democrats are as violent as Republicans. Should ask Judge Chutkin.
I'll make a prediction here that I'm expecting you'll agree with is if on Election Day or whenever we know that actually Donald Trump loses the election, that he will under no circumstances accept that, and there will be calls for violence and almost certainly some sort of political violence, much less so than if Donald Trump wins the election. And I expect you would agree with that, right?
I do agree. And if a Democrat won fair and square, I worry that there'll be localized individual acts of violence, like some of the intense people who went to January 6th with guns. And that's unfortunate, it's deplorable, it's tragic, but it's built into a society where we venerate the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, which the conservative court says is the right to have a gun on yourself, hidden, without a license. Okay. This and next year, two people are super important in making sure democracy works and in stopping future violence. One is Trump, and whether he continues, which everyone expects, him to keep lying and victimizing himself and denouncing other people in bloodthirsty language. And Lindsey Graham. Why him? He's now a far-right senator, all for Trump, but he has he's a lawyer who has displayed intelligence in the sophisticated way he speaks. And he, at one point, like a lot of others, said, oh, Trump is an extremist, horrible person. He said this before he endorsed him. Okay, so in his head, he knows, part of him thinks this. So if Trump loses, will Lindsey Graham this time organize 9 other Republican senators to have a press conference and say a version of the following sentence? We did our best. He lost. And for 250 years, the loser concedes and you try harder next time. And so we do not agree the election was stolen. And anybody who says that is anti-American. Will that rile some Republicans? Maybe. But Lindsey Graham's going to go down as a villain in history if Trump wins, despite Graham knowing he's a thug. And being afraid to say it. So he has to join Bill Kristol and Dick Cheney and other conservatives saying, I tried, we lost, and I'm not now going to support the overthrow of our democracy. It's up to Graham, because if I say it, okay, sell some books, people listen to you, me, but only enough credible Republicans say it. Will there be a change in the Republican Party and the country?
I got to say, if we're pinning our hopes on Lindsey Graham, I don't talk about a spineless guy, at least in my view. I feel like ever since John McCain left the scene, he's just lost any moral compass that he actually had. I would hope maybe if we're going to look to any establishment Republicans, maybe guys like Jim Langford or folks who I think have had at least some inkling of backbone or integrity. But boy, I got to say, if it's up to Lindsey Graham, I don't have a lot of hope, Mark.
Well, I agree with you. And I chose him because Langford is a Senate Republican who was for a bipartisan border exchange bill. Mike DeWine is a conservative Republican who's the governor of Ohio. And he's for border reform, as I indicated. And he denounced when Trump said that patients in his state were eating cats and dogs. He denounced that. And so there are a group of people who are less well-known Republicans, Governor Sununu, who denounced Trump this past weekend for the vile way he speaks. But they're not opinion leaders, really, in the Republican Party. And so are there some of them who would join people like Graham to say enough's enough? Not because I expect Graham to do it, but as Norman Cousins wrote in the 1950s, no one's smart enough to be a pessimist. So if you would ask me, what's the chance that Dick Cheney endorses Joe Biden or Kamala Harris a year ago? You would have said zero. Now he has. And so you got to aspire to see who will tell the truth and be a profile in courage. Of course, the name of President Kennedy's book, because John McCain, who was a conservative, he was the vote that saved Obamacare. And so some people will cross the aisle and do what's right, like Langford has done on immigration. And we need a few more Lindsey Grahams, not Michaels and Marks.
So in the end, you mentioned pessimism. In the end, do you feel optimistic about the near to medium term future for American politics? And if so, when you look at the landscape, what gives you the most cause to feel at least somewhat optimistic about the future?
Well, I am confident Harris will win. H.L. Mencken wrote, confidence is the sense you have before you know better. And so I'm confident, but, I'm not going to bet my family's life on it. For now, if Trump wins and, God forbid, has a Republican House and Senate, so the guardrails are totally down, with this Supreme Court, I'm then not confident our democracy will survive, frankly. And that's why this election, let me come up with a phrase, is an inflection election. It'll either go one way or the other. And then it depends on patriots of all parties to say, election's over, we have to move on, which we've always done until this crowd came in who are apologists for dangerous dictators. Trump has said he wants to be a dictator. I'm sorry, I'd have to write a book that takes him at his word. Because if the Supreme Court is gone, and then Congress is, and then the president is, I'm not sure your radio show is enough to keep Americans upright.
All right. Well, on that note, we will close. Mark Green, thank you so much for coming on and talk with me. I really appreciated it.
Oh, really? Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this Politics Guys interview. If you're not already a supporter of the show, I hope you'll consider becoming one, because without our supporters, we wouldn't be able to do this. And when you become a supporter, you get not just that warm, fuzzy feeling, knowing that you're supporting a good cause. I like to think we're a good cause, but you also get stuff like ad-free versions of everything we put out. You get our supporter exclusive midweek show, the full length of that, not just the preview. And you also get to be part of our Discord group if you want. And there's always some interesting conversations going on there. At the $10 a month level or more, you get to actually be part of the episodes Jay and I do, if that's something you're interested in. So there's a lot of stuff is what I am saying, and I hope you'll consider checking it out. And to do that, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. If you want to support us on Venmo, we're at Politics Guys. You can also support the show through PayPal, and all of our support links are always in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And as always, I want to close with a very special thank you to our wonderful executive producers, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.